Warpugs, it's time for us to jump back into the Siege of Vraks, and this is Lord Zhufor. And I'm probably saying that name completely wrong, because I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about him before, to be honest with you. Guys, the breach has been made, and now it is time for us to see some ridiculousness. Janovich has done an amazing job putting all of this together, and I can't say it enough. This is on the level of an actual historical documentary, and it's been amazing to just check this out. Guys, all of his links are going to be in the description down below. I highly recommend that you check him out. He has done an amazing job with this series, and he continues to do incredible work as far as 40K explaining events, times, and things that have happened. Now we're going to jump right into this. Let's just go. Lord name is hard to pronounce. Let's roll.
The Tutorial Siege army had reasons to rejoice. Lord Hector Rex's forces had the entire curtain wall surrounded. Daily artillery barrages and aircraft bombing raids relentlessly rained down their ordnance upon the citadel's void shields. After 17 years of fighting, the Imperium had truly gained the upper hand. Militarily, the Vraksian forces had been decimated, and their morale suffered accordingly. The once unshakable Vraksian resolve had been fractured. There were still those who would loyally hold their defensive positions to the bitter end, but in various sectors the cardinal spell of a heroic resistance had worn off. Like rats on a sinking ship, they started looking after their own interests. The army's cohesion was falling apart rapidly as many troops disobeyed their direct orders. Many prioritized self-preservation. The 88th Siege Army encountered large amounts of abandoned enemy vehicles and equipment, with Vraksians disorderly withdrew from their positions.
And here's the bad thing, even if you surrender at this point, you're already hosed. It's over.
Many threw down their arms to surrender, hoping against all odds that the Imperium would spare their lives in captivity.
Nope.
For the first time in the war, the 88th Siege Army was faced with the prospect of taking massive amounts of prisoners as swaths of Vraksian militia surrendered. Their survival was a fool's hope, of course, as countless Imperial citizens had been killed for lesser crimes. These traitors, who had spent more than a decade under the influence of chaos, would be shown no mercy. Those who had been converted into the most hardcore of chaos worship prayed for Nurgle's blessing, expecting that the pestilent god would prolong their wretched lives in whatever way possible. Then there were those who preferred to go out in a blaze of glory, recklessly throwing themselves at the Imperial lines in the attempt to gain the blood god's favor. There was little the Vraksian High Court could do at this point. Endless reports of routs and defeats came back from the front. Orders for counterattacks were thrown in the wind. The war was lost. Driven to despair,
I see what he did there, dude.
the mentally frail Cardinal Zaphon had lost all hope and retreated himself to his personal chambers, depressedly awaiting whatever end was to be his fate. But the traitor Space Marines would never break like these weak-willed mortals. Zhufor, leader of the Skulltakers warband, would not allow the war to end. This was not a time for weakness, but for strength. Driven by his ambitions for slaughter, he aimed to usurp overall command. His rise to power began when he challenged the leader of the Berserkers of Skalathrak's warband. Only the strongest could be the leader. The survivor of their combat would prove himself favored by Khorne. Armed with chain axes, the two Chaos Lords fought to the death, with Zhufor coming out as the victor. By
Hooray.
right of conquest, he had now gathered all Khornate Berserkers under his command. He then made an
It's always impressive how Khorne resembles Orc.
offer to the Wordbearer's sanctified warband. If they swore fealty to him for the remainder of the war, he would grant them help in opening a warp portal on Vraks. Since their arrival on the planet, these most zealous of Chaos worshippers had been working hard to break the barriers between real space and the warp in order to bring demons to the world.
Because of course they would.
The Sanctified had their arcane warp knowledge, and the bloodlusting berserkers would guarantee the required blood sacrifice.
Of course they would.
accepted the offer. With this alliance secured, Lord Inquisitor Hector Rex's prediction was bound to come true. A demonic incursion had become inevitable. Zhufor now commanded the largest Chaos faction on the planet, and would use it to subjugate the remaining warbands to his will. To prove his authority, he attacked the Black Brethren of Ares, and killed their leader. By now, the other Chaos Space Marines understood perfectly what would happen if they were to defy Zhufor. Either they joined him, or they would face destruction at his hands. Unsurprisingly, the remaining warbands swore fealty to Zhufor. There were a few exceptions, however. The remnants of Plague Marines stationed in the swamps on the Eastern Front had not been caught in the encirclement. They had been isolated from the Citadel, and so no contact with them had been established. Lord Arkos had also chosen to remain independent, but the outnumbered Alpha Legion knew better than to outright defy the might of Zhufor. Instead, they had bargained for their independence. And as much as Zhufor's hands were itching at the opportunity to rip out Arkos' throat, the Coordinate leader was not stupid enough to underestimate his rival and accepted the proposal.
You don't want to go around underestimating the Alpha Legion. You don't know what they'll do.
After all, it was Arkos who had first arrived on Vraks many years before any of the other warbands. By becoming an advisor to the Cardinal, he had firmly cemented himself as a figure of authority within Vraxian High Command. Zayfen was no military man, and it had mostly been Arkos who had led the Vraxian army through the toughest ordeals. Surely the cunning Alpha Legion had some backup plan just in case Zhufor would force their hand. Of all warband leaders, Arkos alone had gained the Cardinal's trust. Now he would agree to betray him and allow Zhufor to capture the Cardinal in order to complete his coup. True to his word, Lord Arkos led the Berserkers into the palace where they slaughtered the guards and dragged the self-pitying Zayfen out of his bedchambers. They couldn't kill him yet. He would be dressed up and forced to make a final public announcement. After all, the Cardinal remained the symbolic leader of Vraks, and every single defender had sworn loyalty to him. The easiest way for Zhufor to gain further power was by forcing Zayfen to publicly promote him to official military commander in his stead. With the ceremonial transfer of power out of the way, Zayfen was of course secretly thrown into Vraks' deepest dungeons, where he would await his death. The only use they had left for this pathetic, sniveling cardinal was as a human sacrifice. Surely the Sanctified could put such a high-ranking victim to good use for their unholy rituals. Before long, Zayfen's skull would be offered before the Blood God's throne. Zhufor's coup was now complete.
And this is why you don't mess with Chaos, kids, because you wind up in a decade-long siege and your head gets cut off by a Coordinate Berserker.
Blood and treachery, he had made himself master of Vraks. The millions of remaining defenders were now sworn to him. With an iron fist, he restored order amongst their ranks. They would march to his every command, or face the consequence.
Yes. Huh.
Over on the Imperium side, Lord Inquisitor Hector X was not at all pleased when he received Directive Order 4007-72-09 from the Departmentum Unitorum. It was devastating news. The Departmentum Unitorum had reviewed troop allocations across the Scarus sector and found that the current troop number on Vraks was no longer sustainable nor required. The command stated that the 88th Inquisitorial Siege Army must retreat several Krieg regiments from the front line and prepare them for transportation off the planet. Resources sent to the planet would likewise be reduced as the Siege of Vraks was being downgraded in priority. Lord Hector X, of course, immediately recognized the order for what it truly was. The Order Hereticus and Ecclesiarchy Alliance had meddled with the Imperial Bureaucracy. Resentful that they hadn't been able to seize command of the war themselves, they had endeavored to thwart Lord Hector X's efforts on Vraks. It was a bitter pill to swallow that now the siege was going so well, they were sabotaged.
And surprisingly enough, this is to be expected out of Imperial bureaucracy.
Loyal and honorable Death Corps troops being requisitioned to fight on another frontier had been reduced to pawns for perverted political interests. But the experienced Lord Inquisitor was not new to such underhanded tactics, and both sides could play these games. In response, he sent a formal request to the Council of Terror to cast their supreme judgment over this unjust order. By objecting these orders and pushing the decision up the chain of command, none less than the High Lords of Terror themselves would have the final say over the matter. Perhaps they could be persuaded to overturn the Munitorum's demands. He sent envoys to represent his position. They would explain in no uncertain terms that all Death Corps regiments had been officially integrated into the Order Malleus, and so by right, these were beyond the Munitorum's jurisdiction.
Hooray!
This pencil pushing would also buy him precious time. The heart of the Imperium's bureaucracy is known to operate slowly. Until the final verdict returned, the Inquisitor could deal with the Death Corps troops as he pleased, allowing him in the meantime to reallocate resources across his army and prepare for the worst. Unfortunately, the news that eventually returned to him was not good at all. The High Lords of Terra expressed their sympathy towards his plight as commander and reassured him of the imperative of the siege, but Directive 4007-72-09 would not be overturned.
Sadness.
The 88th Inquisitorial Siege Army must shrink as required, although the overall troop reduction had been slightly altered in Hector Rex's favor. The Inquisitor was now pushed into a corner. Should he choose to contest these orders again, now that they had come directly from the Council of Terra themselves, his career would not survive.
Right.
His political opponents would eagerly emphasize the ironic similarity between Hector Rex and the apostate Cardinal Zaphon in their attempts to keep more troops under their personal command than their authority allowed for. Many had allowed their pride to tempt them down the path before, including the War Master Horus himself. What made Hector Rex think he could get away with it? Even some...
Oh, yeah, this is pretty much imperial politicking at its finest. This is what this is.
One as powerful as a Lord Inquisitor would have to watch his steps, or excommunication would inevitably follow. Lord Hector Rex was no traitor, and never would be. He was fully aware that in the never-ending war with chaos, the future of humanity was at stake. He would not let his pride stand in the way of his duty, and so he submitted himself to the order and prepared parts of the 88th Inquisitorial Siege Army to withdraw from the front lines. The 3 remaining regiments of the 1st Line Corps would all be departing Vraks, along with the 19th Bombardment Corps. This was a severe blow to the available firepower, for the 19th contained a significant portion of the army's heaviest guns. To make matters worse, half the independent artillery companies would also go. The 8th Assault Corps was to be fully withdrawn, although the Inquisitor's objections had at least managed to save a single tank regiment, which would now be assimilated into the 11th Assault Corps. Lord Hector Rex did not know where these troops would be sent to. He suspected that they would be deployed against the ever-encroaching Tyranid threat in the galactic east, but these were mere guesses. Nor would he be informed later, for the emissaries that he had sent to Terra for an audience with the High Lords never returned alive. They had been killed on their way back towards Vraks. Standard procedures warranted an investigation, but the outcome was fruitless.
Yes.
The poor souls had presumably been murdered by the signature phase weapon of a Calidus assassin, which of course meant a perpetrator would never be officially identified.
Truth.
The Lord Inquisitor had been deemed loyal, but some organization within the Imperium felt it necessary to send a thinly veiled warning regardless. Hector Rex was unfazed. Power plays like these were commonplace for a man of his rank, and so he simply occupied himself with the continuation of the siege. He would have to make do with fewer Krieg guardsmen, tanks, and artillery, but the setback wasn't the end of the world. He still had 4 line corps, 1 assault corps, and a load of artillery at his disposal.
Fan
The
Titans.
loyalist Titans of Legio Astorum were still on Vraks, and Krieg engineers were diligently busy digging their tunnels beneath the curtain wall. He ordered the remaining troops to reposition along the front lines and maintain the encirclement. As far as Hector Rex was concerned, the war would be finished swiftly.
Those are famous last words. Warbugs. Imperial bureaucracy sometimes is maddening to try to explain to people. It's maddening. The amount of backstabbing, the Byzantine nature of imperial bureaucracy, and the politicking that goes on, especially between branches of different orders in the Inquisition, is flat out insane. It's storming outside. I might not be able to do something else tonight. I don't know. We'll find out. But the amount of politicking is just insane when it comes down to who is in what pocket. Warpugs, thank you for checking this out with me. I'm going to get off of here before I wind up losing power, because I got a feeling that's right around the corner. If you would, just hit the like button if you haven't already. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you next time.